everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we're going to play a little bit of a game, returning to the NFL, but this time talking about some potential free agent QBs on the market and where they can land. Yes, a little bit of a game of NFL QB Matchmaker, if you will. And it's going to be an exciting cycle to monitor because some of these guys might feel safe in their standing with their respective teams, but others might be shrewd additions to QB rooms around the league if they move in the coming weeks. So without further ado, let's play NFL QB Matchmaker. Starting off with the guy who had an incredible season in Minnesota, potentially could leave. I'm not necessarily certain that he will, but if he does, he certainly will be a hot commodity in the market and could go to several teams. We already talked about this guy going to one team that I really think would be a nice addition, but how about him returning to the media circus that is New York? Yes, I'm talking about Sam Darnold potentially becoming a New York Jet yet again. And now I know this sounds a little bit more far-fetched than, say, him going to the Raiders now that Pete Carroll has made it clear that he might not want Russell Wilson there after all. But I do think that a Sam Darnold to Jets reunion would not be so terrible. Think about it. The Jets could be in QB purgatory depending on the whole Aaron Rodgers situation, and no one knows what the heck he's going to do. But I do think that with the weapons they have, and with Aaron Glenn at the head coaching position, even though he's a defensive-minded guy, he's going to want someone who can utilize all of these pieces in the Jets' offense to the best of his abilities. And that's what I think the mistakes of a guy like Robert Saleh were, that he didn't just allow Aaron Rodgers to utilize some of these guys to the best of his abilities, and he let Aaron Rodgers run the show. If Sam Darnold were the QB of the New York Jets, yes, a lot of questions are going to be asked about his former tenure there, but I still think that now he has a solid season under his belt. He proved that he can still be a solid quarterback in this league, and it would make a lot of sense because the Jets right now are not necessarily in a position where they can move up in the draft to draft a QB. I don't necessarily think any QB in the latter rounds would appeal to them, and Sam Darnold could come cheap for you. So why not Sam Darnold to the Jets? As far-fetched as it may sound, I still think that he would fit better in Las Vegas because Pete Carroll, an experienced head coach, has worked with a guy a little bit like Sam Darnold in Russell Wilson and knows how to implement a guy into a roster that really utilizes a little bit more old school philosophies, and I think that will be very comfortable for Sam Darnold. But if the Jets want to make a swing at him, then so be it, because they really could be, like I said, in QB purgatory and might not have many options available to them in the coming weeks in terms of looking for QBs should, like I said, Aaron Rodgers leave, because we don't know what he's going to do. So this could be a completely moot point should Aaron Rodgers decide to stay, but this could be an interesting reunion for Sammy D in the future should it happen. And then let's talk about a guy who I think will stay with his current team and give them a completely new look to their offense. And I think that this would be potentially the best move that I mentioned in this segment, just because this is someone who the Pittsburgh Steelers brought in along with Russell Wilson, who was forced to start the season when 4-2, knows this offense, but ultimately gives them a lot more upside as a similar kind of prototype of what Russell Wilson in his best years could give you, and that is Justin Fields. Like I said, he's a little bit more of a young Russell Wilson, like an old Russell Wilson. He still has elite arm strength. It's just, a matter of him utilizing it correctly and getting to that point. But like I said, if Justin Fields decides to remain with the Pittsburgh Steelers and they re-sign him and invest in him, this could very well be a very shrewd move, and an astute one at that, because getting younger at the position could be paramount for the Steelers, and why not, not risk, going into this QB cycle of drafting guys like, Kenny Pickett in the past, and having him go through this cycle yet again of being a failure or a project at most in that system, and stick with the guy you signed in the offseason in Justin Fields, who played several games with you and really looked decent doing it. So, even though it might not be the sexiest option, and even though he might end up being a bridge guy, if the Steelers go the route of drafting a guy, whether it be this year or next year potentially, I feel like sticking with a guy like Justin Fields proves that the Pittsburgh Steelers want something new at the QB position and not just the same old. Because eventually you're going to have to start wanting to be competitive in this AFC North. You can't just skate by barely squeaking into the postseason and losing in the first round. You want to have some success, not just in the AFC North against these tough opponents, but later and later into the postseason. So Justin Fields gives you a chance of that. And if you want to draft a quarterback, it gives you a nice pathway to developing that young guy, whether it be in this year's draft or next year's draft for the future. So I really think that this would be perhaps the shrewdest move, not necessarily a big blockbuster deal that sees him go elsewhere, but a shrewd move that keeps the Pittsburgh Steelers as a contender potentially for the next couple of years because of the fact that you're willing to go with something new. But let's get back into some movement here. This particular one is one that's perhaps the most popular that I've seen over the recent weeks and potentially could happen in a trade, a like-for-like swap, so to speak. Kirk Cousins moving to the Browns. I forgot about that one, putting the graphic there. But ultimately, I want to talk about this one first before we get into Russ's movement, because Kirk Cousins to the Browns is the most popular kind of storyline we've heard with all of these QB movement around the league. But ultimately, I think it's going to be in a situation where the Browns potentially trade Myles Garrett for Kirk Cousins, because I think that would be a clever move on the part of both teams, seeing as to how the Browns could get, say, a quote-unquote bridge guy in Kirk Cousins for whether they bring back Deshaun and have him play for another year, or they test, the free agent market, or, rely on someone in the draft. And then the Falcons get a elite pass rusher to really bolster that defensive front and stick with Michael Penix. And I think that would be a very smart, shrewd move for both teams. But ultimately, Kirk Cousins with the Browns could be a match made in heaven. I didn't really like how he looked this season, but this move could see him back with Kevin Stefanski, a guy he's worked with in the past in Minnesota. And I think that style of offense that they run in Cleveland really takes the pressure off of what he did in Atlanta, where he was in the pistol a little bit more, relied on him to move a little bit more in the pocket, and really putting pressure on that torn Achilles that he had last year. But if he moves the Browns system, it could be a lot more effective in terms of how stationary he remains and how it's more timing based. So I would really like this move if it even comes in a trade where Atlanta wants to get Myles Garrett and the Browns want Kirk Cousins, and I think it would work for both parties. But either way, I still think that this would be not just the most popular, but one of the best case scenarios for Cleveland should they just want a bridge option for the season and still rely on Deshaun Watson next season as well, even though I think that would be a terrible idea, and a lot of people would agree with me. But for the final QB matchmaker here, this is one that would seem a little bit more far-fetched than the others, but I really think that it could work out just because Brian Daboll is someone who would like a guy like Russell Wilson, even though he may not be in his peak anymore. But I feel like Russ the Giants could make the more sense than Russ to Las Vegas, because I like how the Giants have an infrastructure at the very least in their wide receiver core with Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and guys of that magnitude. But I do think the only thing separating this from being a far-fetched idea and a brilliant solution to the Giants' QB issues is that offensive line, because Russ has made it clear in recent years that if you don't have a solid offensive line, then I'm not playing for you. And whether it be with Denver and Pittsburgh, we saw that he got a little bit frustrated with, how many times he got sacked. And so moving to the Giants will not help in that department. But if he wants to work with the offensive mind in Brian Daboll, and he wants to work with weapons like Neighbors and Robinson, who really could become underrated wide receiver tandem in today's NFL, then I could see this move potentially working for all parties concerned. Now, obviously, there was questions about whether or not Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson would reunite, and that still could be on the table even though Pete kind of shunned it. But I still think that when you look at the Giants' QB options, yeah, maybe Ward or Sanders falls to you at 3 in this year's draft. But really, if the Titans, the Browns, say, or even a team behind you like the Raiders are aggressive, then you might be stuck in a bit of a purgatory where you have to take the best player available. And the Giants have a lot of other areas of need outside of QB that would make me think that they will be fine if they didn't get a guy like Ward or Sanders at the top of the draft. So getting a guy like Russ and adding that veteran experience to this roster, despite the fact that he probably is going to be frustrated more often than not with this offensive line, then why not make that deal? I think it would be an interesting combination of Daboll, Wilson, and this receiving core in trying to get this offense really up to speed. But let me know what you think about all these NFL QBs and their respective matches. I think would be perfect for them. Like, coming up next, we conclude with the basketball segment, talking about how the defending national champion Boston Celtics can navigate the trade deadline in its final hours. They've already made a pretty shrewd move, money-saving wise, in the past couple of hours. But ultimately, let's take a look at how they can make even more and make it matter as a result as well right after this short break.